So for today, we have Beacon presenting, and Beacon is represented by Ioana Panate and Matty Slingsby. And for today, they will discuss from discovery to deals, the neurological oligonucleotide landscape at a glance. Matty, Ioana, the floor is yours. And for the people watching the webinar, if you have any questions for Ioana or Matty, please use the Q&A function. So the screen is yours.
Thanks very much, Ronald. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. Dialing in from what's been a sunny day in London today. Bit of an intro there. My name is Matty Slingsby. I'm a commercial manager for Beacon RNA and we'll be doing half of today's session. My role involves working with oligonucleotide developers who use Beacon. So I'll be giving a bit of insights into what that is as we go through today.
And I'm Ioana, the Senior Research Analyst for the RNA dataset, and I'll be sharing some data and some insights from the oligos for CNS space.
Fantastic. Yeah, and thanks again for the organizer and OTS for inviting us up to this. We're super looking forward to getting more involved with this space. And what we're going to go through today is a bit of a landscape overview from discovery through to deals, really taking a deep dive into the oligonucleotide data that we capture on Beacon. And what we're going to do is focus specifically on the neurological disorder space in particular today. But we do capture other areas in that as well. Bit of heads up, we're going to, obviously the slides and the analysis we present will be recorded and available on the OTS website, but we'll also be making them available. I'll put our contact details on at the end to reach out in case you wanted to get access to them. So don't feel like you need to be screen grabbing anything as we go through. Cool, so there's a bit of agenda. We're going to start with some recent updates on the oligonucleotide space. We're going to go through some deals and a little bit of new data in the field. I'll set a really brief bit of context to what Beacon is, and then I'm going to hand over to Ioana, who's going to do a deeper dive into the data we capture on the oligos for neurological space in particular. We're going to focus on preclinical, clinical, regulatory, and deal insights. So plenty of analysis to kind of take home from that. As questions might come up as we go through this, like where we're sourcing this data from, what actually is Beacon. I'll spend a little bit more time at the end just giving a bit of context into the more granular data that we capture on our database. But what you'll see today will all be taken from Beacon over the last couple of days via downloading some different searches that we've run. Cool. As a bit of a brief overview then, Beacon RNA, we're part of the database solution provider who basically have different types of modality and disease-based modules that are unique in the sense that they capture different drugs and drug modalities. So we're going to be going through a lot of the information from Beacon RNA today, which is purposely built with, actually worked with oligonucleotide developers to build this in 2021 and allows people to kind of search drug trials, deals, and companies using things like delivery systems, nucleic acid modifications, and relevant technologies. Some of the other data sets we have aren't going to be included today, but they cover different modalities like ADC, gene therapy, biologics, etc. And what we started to do is launch some more disease-focused data sets. So just this week, we've launched Beacon Neuroscience, so we'll have a bit of insights into how that overlaps with RNA as well, given the agenda for today. Cool. As I mentioned, we're going to be going through Beacon RNA. This is a database that captures all different types of modalities. So anything delivering or targeting RNA for drugs, trials, deals, and companies across the globe. Just some of the different types of modalities that we would capture and have in our different analysis you may see is mRNA, gene editing, things like RNA editing, circular RNA, and all these different novel modalities. But the rest of the analysis will be focusing, of course, on the oligonucleotide space. And within that, we capture RNAi, including siRNA, microRNA, short hairpin RNA, of course, ASOs, aptamers, and a really hot areas, some of these modalities overlapping right with antibody oligonucleotide conjugates. So we'll have a bit of insights into that. Cool. In terms of the CNS space in particular, we're obviously focusing on that. And what we've seen over the last, I guess, year is there's probably two key areas of oligonucleotides that are taking a lot of interest and investment. One of them is the cardiometabolic space, and the other one is neuroscience. For us, we picked to go through this today because I think it's quite interesting that a lot of these diseases are very difficult to treat, difficult to get across the blood-brain barrier, or use invasive treatments to go directly into the CNS. So we've actually seen over the course of the last few years, different advances in oligonucleotides and the complexity of these modalities are actually making some great strides in terms of being a potential choice for patients in the future for these areas. And just to dive into a little bit more about, kind of what we've seen over the last couple of months that backs this up, I'm going to go through some recent data for the oligos CNS space. So Across 2025, we've seen 66 new drugs coming from the discovery level. That might not seem like a lot, but it's over 10% of the entire space. So there's still new entries coming in, but also there's a significant number of preclinical drugs that are releasing data now and looking at IND enabling. 21 clinical trials have been initiated in 2025, so there's now 123 ongoing trials that are recruiting patients from phase 1 through to phase 4. And one of these that has announced data over last week was Stoke Therapeutics STK-001. Yeah, they're in collaboration with Biogen and put some nice clinical data out at IEC regarding their ASO for Dravet syndrome. So that was their phase 1/2 efficacy data. They are now in phase 3, so we're looking forward to seeing some insights from that over the coming months. AOC, as I mentioned, been taking a lot of interest in investment. So we've seen both Dyne and Avidity posting quite busy in the conference season. Yeah, for the DMD targeting PMO that Dyne have, we've seen some interesting data at ASCT, ADPD, which we can take a look at later in the presentation. Also, a kind of highly prominent drug in the space, which uses a different type of delivery platform, is obviously Alnylam's AON-APP or mivelsiran. This is a 16C conjugated siRNA, and across the last couple of months, they've put out some data at AAIC quite recently showing their mouse model efficacy. And also they're now in clinical trials for this program. And also looking at Alzheimer's, we've seen Voyager present some preclinical updates across different conferences for an siRNA therapy that's actually delivered by AAV. So what we're seeing is there's different types of platforms that people are using for oligos. A lot of them are showing different types of success. What we thought was interesting is this is a viral system, but Voyager have also just recently put some more information about their non-viral blood-brain barrier shuttle. It's called NeuroShuttle, and that can conjugate to different oligonucleotide, small molecule biologic payloads. So a lot of the theme that we're seeing in this space are these new shuttles to try and kind of target CNS and taking learnings from both biologics and the oligo space. We're seeing that translate into some deals. So a lot of the data in the space is obviously being commercially interesting for large pharma and VCs. The fundraising market is obviously really challenging in biotech at the minute, but oligos seem to be faring really well. Just this week, Arrowhead and Novartis announced a deal for an siRNA therapy for Parkinson's and additional targets. That's up to $2 billion in potential milestones. And what was nice here is that's using subcutaneous delivery of Arrowhead's TRiM platform, which is a ligand-based conjugate approach. Novartis have been busy this week. They've also announced a deal yesterday with Argo Biopharma, who also do siRNA, but that's more for things like cardiometabolic diseases. So a lot of large pharma are kind of going after some of these siRNA therapies and the large patient populations they can address. From the fundraising standpoint, last week we saw Leo Therapeutics announce their Series A. They have a pipeline that spans small molecules for neuropsychiatry and also ASOs for ALS. One of those is in the clinic for the small molecule. But what was interesting here as part of the fundraising was they're going to be advancing a next generation shuttle platform, like a lot of other companies for blood-brain barrier delivery. And with that, we've seen a couple of other deals active in this space. Vectoris and Sakana have partnered for systemic delivery of oligos to CNS. So there's basically two parts to the puzzle here. Sakana are using their oligonucleotide technology to develop the payload, and Vectoris are using a VHH antibody shuttle to get across the blood-brain barrier. So we expect to see a significant number more of these shuttles popping up in the space over the next couple of years. There's 68 antibody oligoconjugate drugs that we capture on Beacon from a preclinical standpoint, but we've also noticed there are about 480 patents in this space, looking at our new Beacon ADC patent data. So we're going to expect to see like loads more deals and kind of activity across this antibody-based shuttles and people looking at different receptors outside of TFR. And then a little bit different, showing that it's not just one type of delivery platform. People will be aware that Biogen and City Therapeutics had collaboration early in the year for RNAi for CNS disorders. City Therapeutics recently launched with 150 million. That was John Maraganore, who's a founding CEO of Alnylam. He's also launched another company in siRNA this week. And they're going to start using different ligands to target the CNS for RNAi. So Biogen have been well active in the ASO space for a number of years, but now have partnerships with both City and Atlanta for RNAi for the CNS. So yeah, what we're seeing here is like a lot of large pharma and obviously other biotechs are raising decent investment and having interesting partnerships to combine expertise to both deliver and develop efficacious oligos. So yeah, I think that should set the context nicely for why we're going to go a little bit deeper into this particular space for the neuroscience field in particular across the next couple of slides. With that, I'll hand over to Ioana to dive in a little bit deeper.
Thanks, Matty, for that introduction and for setting the context. So moving forward, I will share some insights on the preclinical, clinical, and regulatory insights from the oligosphere CNS landscape. So starting with a snapshot of the overall neurology space to place oligonucleotides in the grand scheme, we notice that over 6,000 drugs are currently targeting neurological disorders. This includes neuromuscular diseases as well as neurodegenerative diseases, and as well as brain tumors and so on. Of these, almost 500 are oligonucleotide-based drugs, representing 7% of the neurological disorder landscape. So this data has actually been extracted from our newest Beacon dataset, which is called Beacon Neuroscience, like Matty was explaining earlier, which has launched on September 2nd, so very, very recently. But currently, what we're seeing is that small molecules represent 45% of all neurological disease treatments, followed by advanced therapies, which represent 37% of the landscape. What stands out, of course, is the fact that oligonucleotide-based drugs are most frequently leveraged, the most frequent leveraged modality of all advanced therapies modalities, particularly when it comes to treating CNS disorders, as they can precisely modulate genetic drivers and already carry regulatory precedent. Focusing on the oligonucleotide space, then the following slides use data particularly extracted from the Beacon RNA dataset. So Beacon RNA currently tracks 2,270 oligonucleotide-based therapeutics, 28% of which are targeting a neurological or CNS disorder. This graph breaks down the oligo for CNS space by oligonucleotide modality, showing the number of drugs actively being developed in green, while the line is representing the assets that have been previously discontinued or that have seen an interruption in development. So far, the landscape is therefore made up of 354 active therapies and 290 drugs that are no longer in development. Considering the regulatory comfort created by the approval of nusinersen back in 2016 and the proof of their versatility in treating a range of diseases, ASOs represent 47% of the landscape, by far the most advanced modality when it comes to CNS. This graph is further broken down by status, showing the preclinically and clinically active drugs in the space, along with the drugs that have recently entered the pipeline in 2025. The majority of drugs are still being developed at preclinical stages, while ASOs lead the way in the clinical sector, with 54 of these being currently clinically active. On the other hand, compared to other RNAi modalities, what we're seeing is that 45% of ASOs have already been discontinued, mostly at preclinical stages. When we look at the now preclinically inactive ASOs altogether, they were aimed at a wide range of gene targets, which pretty much highlights the uncertain target biology as a potential factor for the frequent interrupted development that we're seeing here. While RNA modalities are showing potential with a growing number of preclinically active therapies targeting CNS disorders, a small number of RNAi drugs have also so far entered the clinic. And they're showing an even split between drugs that investigate neuromuscular disorders and neurodegenerative disorders. If we look at 2025, then this is pretty much what Matty was presenting earlier as well. In the CNS space, we've seen 23 new ASO therapies that have entered the pipeline. This was as of August. It appears that now there are 28 new ASOs in the space in 2025. While for RNAi therapies in general, they're gaining traction, and we're seeing 25 new therapies being developed since January as well. Well, different modalities bring different strengths and challenges, but how does this map onto the disease landscape? The most frequently targeted neurological indications have been plotted on this graph, segmented by drug status. And as expected, this shows muscular dystrophies to be clinically and preclinically the most investigated of all neurological disorders. Compared to neurodegenerative disorders, muscular disorders are caused by monogenic targets and don't face the challenges of having to cross the blood-brain barrier for effective treatment, therefore leading to muscular dystrophies being well represented in ongoing clinical programs. If we look beyond muscular dystrophies, then ALS, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's disease have significant preclinical maturity, as we can see in green. ALS is the neurodegenerative disorder that's the most extensively studied indication in the clinic. 15 of these drugs are actively investigated in the clinic for ALS at the moment, which we can see in blue here. Huntington's disease and ALS programs have high rates of discontinuations, though, particularly in early clinical testing. So this snapshot reflects the target validation risk and the fact that programs targeting complex diseases are more likely to fail at the moment, which is very much expected. ASOs have significantly higher clinical presence, particularly across neurogenetic and neuromuscular disorders, with many more investigated in preclinical stages as well. However, the safety and tolerability hurdles require for more research to be conducted and released in the public domain to help the field advance further. So this graph is highlighting the preclinical data availability for the two modalities, ASOs and RNAi, in the context of the current landscape based on the phases of development reached. So the data is showing that a similar number of ASOs versus RNAi programs have been dropped at preclinical stages, which we can see there in gray, while a higher proportion of preclinically active RNAi programs have generated data and released it publicly. So currently, 50% of preclinically active RNAi assets are yet to generate data, as opposed to 65% of preclinically active ASOs. Moreover, what's interesting is this data can help us determine potentially emerging programs in the clinic. So the pie chart is showing that of those drugs with preclinical data generated, 5 ASO programs and 9 RNAi programs are being developed in collaboration by 2 or more corporations, which should indicate that there is enough funding for those programs to have potential of advancing into the clinic soon. There's a few additional assets as well that are developed by collaboration, by corporations in collaboration with other types of institutions, such as non-for-profit or higher education and hospitals, while the majority for both modalities are developed by a single corporation with no evidence of a partnership at this stage. This graph here is showing the most popular neurological drug targets in the oligo landscape against the average estimated and actual enrollment figures pulled from the trials associated with these respective drug targets. For the purpose of this analysis, to assess different recruitment strategies for different drug targets at a relevant clinical stage for the maturity of this landscape, only phase 1 and phase 2 trials have been included. So while DMD is the most investigated drug target for in both preclinical and clinical landscapes, the patient pool is much smaller, with fewer patients to recruit globally as opposed to other diseases such as Huntington's or ALS. However, when it comes to Huntington's disease and the HTT target, even though only 7 trials were eligible for this analysis, clinical studies typically target cognitive and functional endpoints due to the progressive nature of the disease. And so they require a larger sample size to achieve statistical significance, hence why the actual enrollment figures could potentially be higher than estimated figures on average here. Finally, for SOD1, which is the main ALS target, average actual enrollment appears to be underestimated by approximately 50 participants. This was actually influenced by the fact that one ALS trial has been withdrawn early before enrolling participants, and so it's bringing that figure down. Ultimately, recruitment data feeds back into target discovery pipelines and enables data-driven prioritization of targets for future oligo programs. So this data could potentially be useful to get a grasp of. Here, the regulatory announcements disclosed in the first half of 2025 have been listed based on type of update. So this includes expected milestones with a future date as well that have not yet happened, but have been disclosed to potentially happen in the future. The first half of 2025 brings to life the current state of the sector, with a large proportion of regulatory milestones seen signaling a push towards advancing further into clinical research. Trial initiation remains top of the list, followed by drug designations being granted, which have an impact on the acceleration of clinical development, considering the financial incentives and frequent review of data by the FDA. A few highlights from this year are listed here. So we saw Dyne announcing that FDA granted a breakthrough therapy and fast track designation to its for its MDT1 candidate. Also this year, we saw Biogen receiving fast track designation for its Alzheimer's disease candidate, which is also the first fast track designation to be announced in the oligo space for Alzheimer's disease. In terms of drug approval submissions, a few developers have planned for BLA, NDA, or MAA submissions by year end or early next year, including Avidity for one of its DM1 candidates, Unicure for its Huntington's disease program, and then Wave Life Sciences for its DMD drug as well. Of course, all these milestones have an impact on the clinical landscape, and so I'll move on to sharing some clinical data insights. So Beacon RNA tracks 242 trials in the oligonucleotide space for CNS disorders, and here the trial landscape is broken down by modality. So the clinical dominance of ASOs was well established over the past 10 years, as we can see here on the slide. While siRNAs remain largely preclinical, reflecting delivery challenges and fewer clinical entrants, since 2020, there has been a rise in clinical trials initiated for the investigation of RNAi assets. In 2025, we saw the initiation of 12 ASO trials and 5 siRNA trials, the majority of these being phase 3 trials. We can also see ASO having a continuous momentum. So earlier this year, there was a clinical hold being lifted for Almalex ASO. And at the same time, 7 of the initiated trials in the first half were phase 3 trials. Equally, as we've seen on the previous slide, priority regulatory designations are expected to lead to faster development timelines and potentially will take the maturity of this modality from experimental to mainstream clinical development. But as strong pipelines don't always translate into successful progression, let's look at where these programs stumble as well. Here we analyze the number of terminated or withdrawn trials in the space over the past 2 years or 2 years and a half versus those that have gone completed. In the oligo for CNS space, the number of trials that have been terminated early has been steady. However, 5 trials have been terminated only in the first half of 2025, 3 of which were looking at DMD treatments. In comparison, a significantly larger volume of trials gets completed according to plan, highlighting the positive trajectory of the space. Although so far in 2025, only 3 trials have been completed, 16 more trials are expected to be completed by year end. On the side of the slide, the pie chart is highlighting the reason for early trial termination for trials that started in 2023, that got terminated in 2023 or onwards. So these vary depending on modality, and for ASOs in clinical stages, failure is often tied to lack of efficacy in complex neurodegenerative diseases. siRNAs have seen fewer terminations simply because fewer trials exist, and so far the disclosed reasons for termination are related to business decisions. However, it is very well known that the biggest challenge is achieving broad CNS delivery and durability. Understanding why trials fail is essential, but equally critical is knowing what it takes for trials to succeed. So on this slide here, we see that the space is still very early stage. We know, however, that quite a few ASO therapies have progressed into later stages of development, which allows us to have a look at the now completed phase 1 trials, which have investigated these therapies and then can therefore be deemed as successfully run trials. So this graph right here is showing the duration of all completed phase 1 and phase 1/2 trials in the ASO sphere, investigating a program that has since progressed to later phases of development and is still actively being developed. Excuse me. Right, so what this shows is that so far 16 ASO trials have been completed for a drug that then progressed further in clinical trial testing. It appears that trial duration varies widely depending on the disease being investigated, which is expected. And we're seeing successful phase 1 trials in the ASO space having taken between 12 to 58 months to conclude. Here we can see that rare monogenic disorders take less time to run, and generate results compared to complex neurodegenerative disorders. There are 2 DMD trials, though, that took a little bit longer to conclude, as necessary, that there was an extended period was necessary for safety follow-up and phase dose escalation. However, the rule applies when we look at the other trials. Finally, I will share some deals and companies' insights from the overall oligonucleotide space. So what we're seeing on this slide is the number of deals that have been closed or announced in the oligonucleotide space overall, but we're seeing that oligonucleotide collaborations continue to focus on neurological disorders, with CNS disorders accounting for 27 collaborations, and the rest are most likely focusing on neuromuscular disorders. The high scientific complexity, technical delivery challenges, and strategic value of CNS therapeutics altogether make the neurospace the most collaboration-driven segment of the oligonucleotide field. On the slide, we're seeing the number of preclinically active companies in the space based on, depending on RNA modality. We're seeing that 560 active biopharma companies in the RNA space are yet to reach clinical stages, having at least one RNA-based therapeutic in preclinical development. The majority of these are mRNA developers, followed by RNAi developers. This reflects the preclinical momentum that can fuel future RNA deal activity, with various innovative platforms still to be accessed in the field. The preclinical pipeline depth promises a wave of future collaborations across the RNA sector, expected to leverage oligonucleotide derived learnings. And with that, my presentation concludes. I will now pass it back on to Matty.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ioana. Hopefully you can see my screen okay now. Yeah, I'm going to just finish the rest of today's session by just giving a bit more context behind the scenes of what we do at Beacon and how we can support you with access to this type of data. So what you might typically see through our kind of marketing channels, we make a lot of these types of analysis Ioana just went through, available to download. But yeah, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes giving a bit of insight into the more granular underlying data that we capture on Beacon, how we can help you know, with your own research and discovery work. A little bit of context then. So Beacon, we are basically capturing and curating all public data that's got a credible reference, and that's within a 24 to 48 hours. So you can think of things like preclinical insights from PubMed and Nature, conference presentations. I had a bit of analysis on that earlier for things like MDA and ASGCT and OTS where things are made public. That will then make its way into Ioana's team of RNA researchers. They're all well trained in the space and understand the intricacies of the different technologies, and they'll start to tag and curate different drugs and therapies so you can search them, but also access in-depth insights on company pipelines, deals, etc. So a couple of things that would make its way into in a live kind of searchable interface would be preclinical data, platform technology, CMC, milestone development timelines, clinical data, so trial designs, enrollment, dosing, tox, etc. We'd also provide reports and analysis and would capture and curate deal and company information. So you can search, you know, ASO companies, have a look at their pipeline, have a look at their deals, etc. Just to go into a little bit more around this, we obviously we're happy to support anyone who's attending the OTS meetings or obviously part of the society. And we really do kind of serve 3 different core user groups who access the tool. So number 1 is oligonucleotide developers. A lot of these use Beacon to help with things like pipeline benchmarking, discovery research, molecular design, etc., fundraising, competitive positioning to help kind of raise money and showcase where they differentiate. Service providers obviously looking at identifying early stage companies at the preclinical stage. Also, there's a lot of changes going on in the landscape, so they would look at essentially, where do we need to put our services in the next couple of years? What are the new modalities that are gaining more traction, and how can we be ahead of the curve to support the new companies popping up with, things like AOCs and new delivery platforms being part of their portfolio? And also, like, we're open and committed to working with more academic groups in terms of them being able to come in and search for different technologies, understand different experiments at the in vitro levels. And if you are working in academia, potentially looking at spinning out or finding commercial partners, it might be interesting to learn a bit about the more drug development side of things, and we'd be happy to speak to you or to see if we can support you with that. Cool. A little bit more of the interesting things then. Just going to go through some of the unique searching for drugs, trials, deals, and companies that would give a little bit more context to where we've got data from, but also put some ideas into the different technologies that are out there. So one of the examples that we build across our different searching systems is in-depth taxonomies that kind of group together therapies. So an example that I went through earlier with the oligonucleotide data with things like RNAi, siRNA, you can see here how you'd be able to search kind of families or dive a little bit deeper. And what we see here, there's over 200 different delivery platforms that people have announced now for oligonucleotides, going into nanoparticles, conjugates, ligands, peptide, polymers, and you'd be able to kind of come in and search things like AOCs. You can see in the top down at different ligands and proprietary technologies to really kind of understand that, the more technical aspects. So this is essentially why we built Beacon RNA, to really help people get under the hood of the specific technologies and look at extrahepatic delivery, etc. An extension of delivery is the chemical modification, so you can search backbone base and sugar. And target organ is more on the, is it going into the liver, the CNS, where people are trying to get their drugs. So there's some of the options of how we'd build this and how you'd be able to go a little bit more granular than some of the analysis we presented today. At the top of the session, I did mention now Ioana have recently put out some preclinical data. Just an example here of how that gets curated from a poster, and it would make its way into Ioana's team for people to come in and really quickly see things like preclinical efficacy, PK, toxicity from the different sources. So we would essentially do a lot of curation to help you quickly understand, the common trends and benchmark your pipeline, etc. That also includes efficacy, tox, PK, in vitro. And we would do the same for clinical data if you are looking at that. So this is Dyne's clinical trial for AOCs. You can see there's different ranges of conferences, press releases, abstracts, posters for clinical results that we allow you to come in and quickly get access to. A little bit more on this, I mentioned Arrowhead announced a deal with Novartis this week. That would make its way into more of a commercial angle to come in and look at different deals in the platform, as you can see, and ability to then go and laser that and look at company pipelines as well. So you can kind of do the full range depending on what you're interested in. You might be looking from a more commercial angle or purely in R&D. We really did build this platform for 50-50 use case, really, half R&D, half BD, to come in and access the insights they need at their fingertips. Some of the things that we make available, we're going to make this analysis today and the slides that Ioana went through available through our channels, but also I believe you can reach out to OTS or ourselves. But if you want to go onto our website and download some of this, we do routinely make a lot of this available for free. So monthly analysis comes with a subscription where we go into different topics like the oligos for CNS space. We have some insights and different infographics that Ioana and her team will make. We also have a sister company, which is our intelligence team, who basically make one-off kind of consultancy, bespoke reporting, and some different types of trends there. And we cover conference pre and post planners. So you can think of things like ACCT, AACR. For our neuroscience launch, we'll probably looking at things like MDA, ADPD, for you to be able to see the sessions broken down beforehand, and then be able to dive into those afterwards with summaries of the data we've curated. Just a final piece, I did mention at the start of the call, we've launched a new neuroscience data set this week. It's super exciting. This is a little bit different in how it works. It's a very complex space, so people want to either look at the modalities like oligos or broaden this out on an indication level. Just had a bit of a screen grab of the types of information on here, which is modality agnostic to go into oligos, small molecules, different types of advanced therapies, biologics in there. And what you can see on the right-hand side is some of the kind of granularity of it. It's a very complex space for different targeting of the brain regions and tissues. That would allow you to come in and search some of that. So if you are interested in either the RNA oligonucleotide space or some of the neuroscience space from a more indication level, like, we'd be happy to jump on a call with you, look at your own use cases, and just run some searches and explore some insights together with you. With that, looking forward to the OTS meeting. If you haven't already registered for this, it's coming up in October in Budapest. So yeah, you can go to the website, oligomeeting.com. The Beacon team will be there. So hopefully looking forward to meeting some of you. We've got a booth, so we'll be on hand to catch up and run through some live demos or talk through, the landscape with you there. Yeah, no, it should be a good meeting. Hopefully people are ready to attend that and travel across to Europe if you aren't already based there. And with that, we'll open up for any questions. What I've done here is also leave a QR code, which will take you to the website where you can download some of this analysis, request a demonstration, but also our contact details are on in case you wanted to send an email or connect with us on LinkedIn as well. Perfect. Thank you very much.
That was great. This is so exciting. I know that Matty and Ioana have done an incredible amount of work on this, and it's like a hugely valuable tool for researchers. And I've even had a bit of, behind the scenes getting to look at how this functions. And it's really exciting to use for, I think, multiple levels of researchers as well. And so we're going to open up to some Q&A. Just a reminder to put your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll go through and answer them. So our first question here is, what kind of insight can be shared on the current landscape of chemical modifications for the CNS? Are there any trends across assets in clinical trials based on sequence structure?
Yeah, I can tell you that. When a couple of years ago, I did present some analysis at a conference, and it's the landscape's changed since that, and there are some key differences. I think when we come into the CNS and neuroscience, we tended to see more PMOs from the ASO side, so different modifications there. We were just at a conference last week where a lot of it would use the MOE 2' modifications as well. But we are seeing a lot of that would depend on whereabouts they are on the oligo for enhancing the targeting, right? Depending on what the delivery system is. If it's a large antibody, then you might have a different kind of structure to how we do that. In terms of the data, we do capture that on a drug per drug level, and the trends are quite difficult to analyze because they all tend to be different or not available. One of the things we do capture are like the different sequences, but it's difficult to kind of elucidate trends because they are all unique, or potentially companies keeping them quiet until it's approved. So I'd be happy to run through and show you some different searches there. But yeah, the main thing I really picked out was some of the PMO and MOE being a little bit more common, particularly for the ASOs in that space.
Great. So like I said, please add your questions into the Q&A. I think this is an excellent opportunity. We have a lot of webinars where people are asking general questions, but they're asking questions that relate to their research as well. And this in particular is a great opportunity for people to ask, I work in this field. Can I find information about this in the database? And so I would encourage you to ask questions that involve your research specifically, or more general as well. So we have a follow-up question on, is it possible that there's trends in conjugation techniques?
Yeah, I can go for that one if you like, Ioana, as well. In terms of that, a lot of our conjugated drugs for the oligos also tie across to our Beacon ADC module. A lot of them are tagged in the scope of that, which the ADC module is essentially an extension of anything drug conjugates, so antibody drug conjugates, but also AOCs, siRNA conjugates. We've not included any analysis part of this because we're going from more the RNA therapeutic payload standpoint, but on that particular data set, we do capture things like the conjugation site, so the amino acid, if it's cysteine conjugate, the actual payload and the linker. There are the antibody sequences. So yeah, that would kind of dive into more of the ADC world, but we would have some insights on the actual sites there. In terms of the actual conjugates themselves, that is something we do obviously capture on Beacon and haven't included today, but we do routinely put some analysis across. I'm happy to make some for you, and that is where we basically break down into things like GalNAc, different tissues. Obviously, what we've seen in the neuroscience space is very different, and a lot of the conjugates are antibodies or these new shuttles coming through. There is a bit of a lack of data versus some of the other areas that are kind of liver targeting and some of the nanoparticles. But yeah, there's kind of two ways of looking at that, and that's something we can obviously share afterwards if you're interested.
Great. So while we wait to see if there's any more questions, I have another question for you in terms of kind of, you know, you've had so much eyes on the data. You've looked at, you're so familiar with this database. Like, where do you really see, like, where are you personally excited about where the direction of research is going?
Ioana,
I think we're currently, well, is this generally or specifically talking about neurological? Because at the moment, I think we're super excited about cardiovascular. It seems to be, yeah, coming in hot.
That's great.
Yeah, I think from my side,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, so I have the pleasure of working with a lot of companies who, you know, doing their training, onboarding for Beacon, and their use cases change, right? And as I mentioned a couple of times here, every single call I have at the minute is looking at antibody oligoconjugates. It feels like a lot of companies who've been active in the siRNA space and doing like typical ligand are looking at that at the minute. So we think that's going to be interesting, right? That does overlap with some of the ADC developers who have been, you know, really successful oncology, putting that in and kind of like looking at expanding theirs. And I think what we've seen now is like there's a lot of partnership opportunities for oligo companies who might be having expertise for the developing oligonucleotides. These ADC companies don't really have the expertise for that. So it's a good opportunity for people for that. That's something we've seen as super hot. I think with that as well, like there's a mixture of siRNA and ASOs people are using. One of the things for our side is like a couple of years ago when we launched Beacon, the ASO space was larger in terms of number of drugs. So that was 2021, but RNAi has really kind of started to dominate the new drugs at the preclinical level across the board. So yeah, we think there's going to be more kind of delivery technologies, new things popping up for that RNAi space as well.
Great. Well, if there's no more questions, then I'll just finish with, can you just remind people how to get in contact with you in terms of scheduling a demonstration? Obviously, they can scan the QR code. They can reach out to you by email. You had mentioned that also you would be willing to share some slides as well, so people can take a better look. Oh, we have one question snuck in here. Perfect. So what does your database tell about the prospects of CNS siRNAs?
Yeah, and that's something we touched on a little bit in both of our parts of the presentation. I think we've seen, I kind of, if you didn't see earlier, I went through a lot of the Alnylam looking at this space for their ligand conjugation. This is a space we didn't see too much on a couple of years ago because it's a little bit more challenging to deliver some of these where people were looking at things like nanoparticles and had GalNAc locked down. We were at a conference last week, right, and we saw a lot of really interesting advances for that in terms of using either these kind of large like alkyl groups as a ligand or some of these shuttles. So it does look like there's going to be a lot more to come for that, for siRNA in particular. But I think a lot of that is still to be worked out at a preclinical level. But it does feel like there's more deals and activity going in the space for that. So it's definitely not something that's going to be a flash in the pan by looks. Ioana, I don't know if you had anything from your side.
Yeah, I would just add that I think considering the amount of deals and the fact that, you know, so far this year we've seen more siRNAs in the preclinical space being developed than ASOs. I think that we'll start seeing some clinical entrants as well in the CNS space. So yeah, that's what I'd add.
Yeah, I think Alnylam's ALN-APP will be a good kind of testing point for the space with that. That's a well-known drug that got a lot of traction with their platform there. So a lot of companies will be looking at clinical data coming out from that as can we emulate, and is this reality? So yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on that as well.
Great. One last chance for questions. We'll see if anything comes in. But yes, so people can contact you by email. They can also reach out to us, so info@oligotherapeutics.org, and we can connect you as well if you don't take a chance to write down the emails. We do have some webinars coming up, like Ronald said at the beginning. We have one more webinar for September, And that is featuring Roger Paxton and Ashley Cunnelholm, who are from Children's Hospital Colorado and also Boston's Children's Hospital. And then we have the annual meeting. So we hope to see everyone there. I just want to thank Matty and Ioana again for an amazing talk and sharing this resource with us. And I really encourage people to get involved and schedule a demonstration and see how this can help your work.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Erin. Yeah, we're looking forward to attending OTS and getting more involved with some of the community as well. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you on site and meet in person soon. Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.